The moment her boots hit the dirt, Clara Whitmore knew something was wrong. The stagecoach jerked to a stop in the middle of Coyote Creek's one dusty street. And the driver didn't even wait for her to descend before tossing her trunk down with a loud thump. Dust swirled around her ankles, rising with the dry wind and the stench of horse sweat. The town shimmered under the high Colorado sun like a fever dream, a scatter of wooden buildings, a saloon with broken shutters, a blacksmith's anvil clanging in the distance. But no one was waiting. No man with a rose in his lapel, no carriage, no smile, no Matthew Harlan. Clara's gloved hands clenched around the bundle of letters she kept tucked in her travel satchel, their edges worn from reading and rereading on the long journey west from Boston. 8 months of words, promises, hope, and not even a damn hello. The driver climbed back up on the stage. "Ain't nobody here for you, miss?" he asked, squinting down. He must be running late, Clara replied, but her voice sounded small, drowned out by the clatter of saloon doors and a chorus of male laughter. She stood perfectly still on that wide, sun-beaten street as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her with a single trunk, a satchel, and a cold, creeping ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. She walked. The Silver Basin mining office was 2 blocks down, just like the driver said. The sign on the building's front window read, "Silver Basin COMPA and Y. Matthew Harlan and Jack Callahan, proprietors." At least that hadn't been a lie. She paused on the threshold, brushed the dust from her skirts, adjusted her hat, and stepped inside. It was cooler in the office, though the air was heavy with ink and old paper. A young clerk behind the desk looked up. When he saw her, his eyes widened. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes. I'm here to see Mr. Dugney." "Harlan." The clerk swallowed. "One moment, please." He vanished into a back room before she could ask anything further. Clara waited, her breath tightening in her chest. She didn't sit. She couldn't. Her legs trembled from the journey, from nerves, from something she didn't yet want to name. Moments later, the door creaked open again. A different man walked through. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dusty blonde hair that curled at his collar. A faint scar split his left eyebrow, and his eyes sharp blue. Sun-weathered, settled on her like he already knew everything. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "I am Jack Callahan, Matthew's business partner." Clara's mouth dried. "Where is Matthew?" Jack took off his hat. "Let S speak privately." The office behind the door was sparsely furnished, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a map of the Rocky Mountains pinned to the wall. Jack gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I'd rather hear it now," she said. "Whatever it is." He hesitated. "Matthew left for Denver 3 weeks ago. He was supposed to be back days ago. And," Jack exhaled slowly, "we got a telegram 2 nights ago. He's married, Miss Whitmore. To Annabelle Winslow, the governor's daughter." It didn't register at first. Her ears rang. "No," she said softly. "That's not he sent for me. I have his letters. He wanted me here. He asked me to come." "I believe you," Jack said. She looked at him then. Really looked. There was no mockery in his face. Only a kind of quiet regret, as if he had been the one to betray her. Did he? Did he mention me? Did he tell anyone I was coming?" Jack paused. It was all the answer she needed. She turned away, blinking hard. "I can take you to the telegraph office," Jack offered gently. "You can wire your family. I have no one," Clara said sharply. A beat passed. "Well," he said, "then the next stage east isn't for 5 days. Until then, I'd like to offer a solution." She faced him again, guarded. "My sister Annie runs a diner near the stockyards. It's clean, safe, and she could use the help. You'd have a place to stay, something to do until you decide your next step. You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you time and dignity," Jack said. "Nothing more. I owe you that much for what he did." The words hit her squarely in the chest. Time. Dignity. Things Matthew Harlan had stripped away with a telegram and a wedding ring he'd placed on someone else's hand. She nodded. "All right. But only until the next stage comes." "Understood," Jack said. And this time, when he opened the door, Clara followed. Outside, the sun was beginning to fall toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the town. A few miners glanced their way, eyes lingering a little too long. Jack didn't seem to notice, or maybe he was used to it. They passed the blacksmith's forge, where a tall man with copper-toned skin and a serious expression was hammering away. Jack called out, "Elijah." The man looked up, nodded once, then turned his eyes to Clara. For a moment she felt Sanote just looked at, but measured. "This is Clara Whitmore," Jack said. "She'll be helping at Annie's." Elijah gave a slow, thoughtful nod but said nothing. The three continued toward the diner, the silence between them thick but not unkind. Annie's place was a squat building with hand-painted signs and the smell of bread and beans wafting from the windows. When Annie saw Clara, her eyes narrowed. "She's not what I expected," she said plainly. "Neither was your chili last week," Jack replied. "Give her a chance." Annie sighed, then looked Clara up and down. "You ever carried 3 plates at once while dodging cigar ash and men with wandering hands?" "No," Clara said, "but I can learn." Annie stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. But you break something, it's cumin out of your hide." "Deal," Clara replied. For the first time in hours, something in her lifted. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe that was enough for now. That night, Clara sat on a narrow cot in a small room above the diner. Her trunk was at her feet. Her satchel was on her lap. Inside it were the letters, every single one. She lit a single lamp, pulled out the topmost envelope, and opened it. "My dearest Clara, I imagine you stepping off that stagecoach into a bright new world. I'll be waiting. Always." She read the line 3 times. Then she folded it neatly, set it aside, and said aloud to the empty room, "You weren't there." She didn't cry. "Not yet." "He married someone else?" she whispered as the weight of 2,000 miles crushed her in one breath. The scent of frying bacon and coffee pulled Clara from sleep before the morning sun had fully risen. The sounds came next: footsteps, heavy across the floor below. The clatter of metal pans, and someone cursing about burned biscuits. Her eyes opened slowly to the unfamiliar ceiling above her in the cramped little room above Annie Callahan's diner. For a moment, she didn't move. Maybe if she stayed still long enough, it would all turn out to be a nightmare. Just a strange dream from which she'd wake in Boston. The Harlan letters still warm in her lap, not yet acted upon. But the ache in her legs from the train, the stale scent of wood smoke and dust on her traveling dress, the silence in the space where Matthew should have stood. No, this was real, and she was alone in Coyote Creek. Clara rose, washed at the chipped basin in the corner, and buttoned herself into the plainest dress she had. The kind her stepmother used to call farm wife dull, appropriate, considering. Downstairs, the diner was already halfway alive. The morning shift of miners hadn't come in yet, but the clatter of preparations was in full swing. Behind the counter stood Annie Callahan, sleeves rolled up, face flushed, hair tied back in a red kerchief. She didn't look up when Clara descended the narrow staircase. "You sleep, or just stare at the walls all night?" Annie asked, slapping dough into a tray with enough force to make Clara flinch. "A little of both," Clara answered honestly. "You ever cooked in a real kitchen before?" The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. Ever waited tables? The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. Annie paused, finally glancing up. "And what exactly do you know how to do?" Clara met her gaze evenly. "I can read, write, keep ledgers, and survive betrayal without falling apart." Annie blinked, then barked out a short laugh. "Fair enough. Grab an apron. Don't get in my way." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was, Clara realized, the first invitation she'd been offered in days that didn't come attached to pity. She tied the apron around her waist and stepped behind the counter. The first few hours passed in a haze. Orders barked from the kitchen. Plates slammed down. Coffee poured so fast her wrist cramped. The miners came in waves, loud, hungry, and reeking of metal and earth. Some stared at her openly. A A few offered greasy smiles. One asked how much she'd cost for a smile. Before Clara could answer, a low voice cut in from the corner booth. "She's not for sale. She's pouring coffee. Show some manners." The miner shrank. Clara turned to see a man leaning back in the shadows, boots crossed at the ankles. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, dark clothes, and carried himself with quiet gravity. "Elijah Blackbeard," Annie muttered under her breath. Should have known he'd show up early to gawk at the new one. Clara frowned. "Friend of yours?" "My brother's best friend," Annie said, wiping her hands. "That means he thinks he can come in here and act like a wall fixture." Elijah didn't move from his seat, but when Clara passed him with a fresh pot of coffee, he spoke without looking up. "Boston, right?" She paused. "Yes." "You'll either leave in 3 days," he said evenly, "or build something they can't ignore." Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were dark, sharp, and held the kind of stillness that made people nervous. But not Clara. She'd seen worse storms in her own parlor. "Just saying," he said, voice quiet. "This town eats softness. It respects spine." "I have both," she replied, then added before walking away, "in case you're keeping count." Elijah smiled slightly, but said no more. By midday, Clara had made mistakes, spilled 1 coffee pot. Undercooked eggs, dropped a glass butt. Annie hadn't yelled, just grunted, cleaned up the mess, and kept moving. There was an unspoken rule in the diner. You showed up, you did the work, and you didn't cry about it. It suited Clara just fine. Jack Callahan arrived around 2 o'clock, dusty from a morning at the mine. He removed his hat as he entered, scanning the diner until he found her. "You survived," he said. "Barely," she replied, wiping her hands. "Your sister runs this place like a battlefield." Jack chuckled. "That's her charm." He sat at the counter. "How are you really?" Clara hesitated. "I feel awake. Like I've landed in someone else's life and haven't figured out where the doors are." Jack nodded as if he understood. "You know, you don't have to stay here. I can still help arrange your return." "I know." She folded the cloth in her hands. "But going back now would mean returning to Boston with nothing but embarrassment and a pile of used train tickets. I need time." Jack looked like he wanted to say something else, but he held back. "Then you've got it." Before he could rise, the front doors swung open and in walked Ruby Sheridan, draped in red silk at 3 in the afternoon. Her curls pinned high and feathers tucked behind one ear. A woman of curves, perfume, and opinions. Well, she purred, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Clara. "Is this her?" Annie rolled her eyes. "Ruby, the famous letter bride." Ruby approached the counter, leaned one elbow against it. "You're prettier than I expected." He must have been desperate or stupid. Probably both. Clara straightened, but before she could speak, Ruby held up a hand. "Don't get your skirts in a twist, sweetheart. I'm just saying, if the dishwashing gets dull, I could use a new girl. You'd make double what she's paying." Jack stood. "That's enough, Ruby." Ruby grinned. "Protective already?" That was fast. Clara stepped forward. "I appreciate the offer, but I'd rather eat dirt." A pause. Then Ruby laughed full and loud. "Oh, I like her. We'll see how long that Boston pride lasts." She flounced out as quickly as she came, the door slamming behind her. Clara turned to Annie. "Was that normal?" Annie shrugged. "Around here? That was tame." Later that evening, after the rush died down and the sky outside turned golden behind the peaks, Clara sat alone at a back table, nursing a sore ankle and sipping lukewarm tea. Elijah appeared from nowhere and took the seat across from her without asking. "You did well today," he said simply. "I dropped 2 glasses and nearly scalded a man. Still here, though." She looked at him. "Why do you care?" "I don't tea," Elijah replied. "But Jack does." Clara went still. "We just met." "He looks at you like he's trying not to," Elijah said. "That's how I know it matters." She didn't respond. There was too much in her chest already, too much confusion, too many broken pieces not yet settled into anything solid. Elijah rose. This town's not kind, but it's fair if you fight for your place in it. He left her with that thought as the lamps were being lit and the mountains turned to shadow. That night, lying in bed, Clara thought of Ruby's words, of Jack's silence, of Elijah's stillness, of Annie's gruffness. They were all strangers. But somehow, she didn't feel like she was drifting anymore. Not yet anchored, but no longer sinking either. She closed her eyes and whispered, I can do this. I don't need saving, Clara snapped, though. In truth, she wasn't sure if that was a lie. Clara stood with her hands buried in a bowl of biscuit dough. Her sleeves rolled up past her elbows. White flour streaked across her arms like battle paint. Morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the diner, casting long rectangles of gold across the floor. Outside, Coyote Creek was waking up. Hooves clapped on dirt roads, dogs barked, and men cursed the cold over mugs of coffee. Inside, Clara moved with purpose. She no longer flinched at the clang of pots or the barked orders from Annie. After 2 weeks, the rhythms of the diner had etched themselves into her bones' early prep. Sunrise, rush, clean up, ledgers, repeat. Annie grunted from the stove without looking up. You rolled those too thick again. Clara didn't miss a beat. And you burned the gravy again. The older woman snorted. Smart mouth. You said sass was currency out here? I'm just making change. Annie glanced over. One brow arched and a corner of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it wasn't nothing. By 7:30, the place was packed. Miners, ranch hands, and the occasional drifter filled the booths, boots muddy and voices loud. Clara weaved between tables with a tray balanced on one hand, pouring coffee with the other. She barely noticed the stairs anymore, the ones that lingered too long or traveled too low. They were just background noise now. Noise she didn't answer to. That morning, she caught Elijah Blackbeard watching her again from his usual spot near the back wall. He sat alone, as always, drinking his coffee slow and silent. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to her since that first day, but his presence was steady, like a shadow that didn't shift. As she passed by, he nodded once. Nothing more. She nodded back. It was the closest thing to approval she'd gotten from anyone in town, aside from Annie telling her she didn't screw up the eggs too bad today. That felt like winning a medal. By midday, the lunch rush had slowed, and Clara took a seat on the back steps of the diner with a glass of lemonade, her hair damp from the heat. She closed her eyes and listened to the faint rumble of wagons, the hammering from the blacksmith shop, and the murmured gossip of passing women. Word is, Harlan's wife is coming back from Denver next week, a voice said from the alleyway. Clara froze. She's bringing some of her father's men to check on that land deal, the voice continued. Guess she's worried the ink's still wet. The speakers passed without noticing her. 2 women wrapped in prairie dresses and petty judgments. Clara's throat tightened. No mention of her. Of course not. She'd never existed to Matthew Harlan in any meaningful way. Just a convenient distraction. A backup plan. Her grip tightened around the glass. The bell above the door jingled late that afternoon, just as Clara was wiping down the counter. She looked up and immediately felt her chest stiffen. Ruby Sheridan. She was dressed in a soft purple number this time, cinched tight at the waist, a fan in one hand and amusement in her eyes. 2 girls trailed behind her, both younger, painted, and clearly watching Clara with interest. Well, look who's still slinging hash, Ruby said with a smile as she approached the counter. I figured you'd be halfway to Boston by now, sugar. Clara set down her rag and smiled sweetly. Sorry to disappoint. Not at all. In fact, I'm impressed. Ruby leaned in slightly. Most women in your situation would have folded by now. But not you. You're hanging on like a burr on a mule. Annie walked out of the back just in time to catch that. If you're here to eat, sit down. If you're here to talk, go outside. Ruby gave a theatrical gasp. So touchy today. I came to try the biscuits everyone's whispering about. Clara narrowed her eyes. Whispering? Oh, sure. Word is, you've got city hands, but frontier fire. She smiled wider. Almost makes me wonder if I should poach you. One of the girls behind her giggled. Clara didn't blink. You'd be wasting your time. I don't scare easy, and I don't sell cheap. A pause. Then Ruby threw her head back and laughed. Oh, you've got teeth, don't you? She straightened, voice dropping a little lower. Careful, sweetheart. This town likes to see a woman shine, but it loves to watch her fall. Clara met her gaze without flinching. Then I'll give them something worth watching. The room had gone quiet, a few miners turning their heads toward the exchange. Ruby's lips curled in something between admiration and challenge. Well, she said, snapping her fan shut, I think we're going to get along just fine. Later that evening, as the last customers left and the tables were cleared, Annie tossed a towel at Clara and said, You held your own. Clara shrugged. Didn't feel like I had a choice. You didn't, but you did it anyway. Clara paused, surprised by the praise. Is that your version of a compliment? Annie smirked. Don't get used to it. They worked in silence for a moment before Annie added, Ruby doesn't mess with just anyone. If she's poking at you, it means she sees you as competition. I'm not trying to compete, Clara said. That's the thing about towns like this, Annie replied. Doesn't matter what you're trying. People will draw lines for you. When Clara stepped out the back door later that night, the cool air hit her like a bomb. She walked a little down the alley and found Elijah leaning against the side wall. Arms crossed, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. You heard all that? She said. I did. You gonna offer me advice again? The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. He took a slow drag. You already know what you're doing. She turned to face him fully. Then why do you keep watching me? He flicked the ash. Because you're not what I expected. Clara tilted her head. What did you expect? Someone broken, he said. Or running. I was, she admitted. Now I'm neither. He nodded once. Good. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Elijah said, There's more coming. You'll feel it before you see it. What does that mean? But he was already walking away. Back in her room, Clara untied her apron and let it fall to the floor. She opened her satchel, pulled out the last letter from Matthew, and stared at it. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew what it said, more promises, more lies. Instead, she held it to the flame of her bedside lamp and watched it burn. Maybe you came here to be someone's bride, Annie muttered. But hell if you're not becoming your own damn woman. The blast shook the ground beneath Clara's feet like the earth had coughed from its belly. Plates rattled on shelves. Glass cracked in one of the diner's windows. For a split second, everything inside the kitchen went Stellani's hands frozen mid-chop. Coffee percolator hissing in protest. Clara's heart thudding in her throat. Then came the screaming. Clara dropped the mixing bowl and ran for the door. Outside, a thick plume of gray dust curled into the sky beyond the tree line where the Silver Basin mine sat. Men were already sprinting toward the ridge miners' ranch hands, townsfolk moving like a herd of frightened cattle. The sound of panicked shouting rose from the edge of town, colliding with the whistle of wind and the low groan of splintered rock. Clara's eyes scanned the chaos. Where was Jack? She tore off her apron, flung it onto the porch, and took off running. The road to the mine twisted through patches of dried brush and shale. The air reeked of sulfur and smoke. Clara's skirts tangled around her boots. But she didn't stop, not even when her lungs burned, or when she stumbled on a rock and scraped her palm raw. By the time she reached the outer shaft, the scene was pure madness. Men shouted orders. Others coughed up black dust, faces streaked with blood and soot. A wagon rolled past carrying two men who weren't moving. Clara scanned the crowd with wild eyes. Jack, she called. Jack, a hand caught her elbow firm, steady. She turned to find Elijah, streaked with sweat and dirt, eyes sharp. He's inside, he said. Went in after a boy who didn't make it out. Clara's stomach dropped. He's still in there. Elijah nodded once. The mouth of the mine looked like a broken jaw. Wood beams twisted and cracked from the blast. Smoke curled out in lazy spirals, as if the mountain itself was bleeding. Clara took a step forward. No, Elijah said firmly. You stay here. But I'm going. You want to help? Keep the wounded from bleeding out. That's the only way this doesn't get worse. Then he was gone, slipping into the smoke like a shadow. Clara turned back to the chaos and forced her hands to steady. A man stumbled toward her, blood dripping from his temple. She caught him before he collapsed. The next hour passed in a blur of torn cloth, shouted orders, and too many men groaning from wounds she didn't know how to treat. Elijah emerged, first covered in soot, carrying a young boy with a shattered arm. Jack followed 5 minutes later, limping, coughing, blood trickling from a gash on his scalp. Clara rushed to him, relief slamming into her so hard she nearly cried. You idiot, she said, gripping his arm. He tried to grin, then winced. Wasn't going to let the kid die? I wasn't talking about the boy. He looked down at her then, eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. Missed you too. She helped him to sit on a log while Annie, who had arrived with medical supplies, cleaned the wound. Clara sat beside him, ignoring the soot on her dress, the ache in her legs, the horror all around. You went into a mine that was collapsing, she said quietly. Why? Jack didn't answer right away. Then, because this place has too many graves already. I didn't want to dig another. Clara looked at him. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to yell. Instead, she reached for his hand, and he let her hold it. The sun had set by the time things quieted. Most of the injured were brought back to town. The dead had been laid out under canvas near the tree line. Jack insisted on walking back, despite the limp, and Clara didn't argue. Elijah walked behind them, silent as always. At the edge of town, Jack paused and turned to him. Did they ever find the ledgers from the north tunnel? Elijah's face darkened. No, but I did find something else. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded map, stained and partially torn. Clara looked over Jack's shoulder as he unfolded it. It was a dead-old fragile, but the names on it were legible. Property of Blackbeard family lands, transferred under duress. Clara looked at Elijah. This is yours? Elijah's jaw tightened. Matthew and his people used forged claims to move the boundary lines. This map proves it. Jack muttered a curse under his breath. Damn him. He married the governor's daughter 2 days after this was finalized, Elijah added. Timing was indeed coincidence. Clara felt her blood go cold. You think he planned it all? The letter's me. Elijah didn't flinch. I think he needed a distraction. A woman who wouldn't ask questions. Someone from far enough away who wouldn't matter when he left her behind. Clara swallowed hard. Jack turned to her. I didn't know. I swear. I believe you, she said. But that doesn't make it any less cruel. They stood there in silence, the wind rustling the edges of the ruined deed. Later, as Jack lay resting in a cot at the back of the diner, his leg bandaged and head wrapped, Clara sat by his side. Still too wired to sleep. You saved a boy today, she whispered. You risked your life. Jack stirred. You saved a dozen men's blood from spilling out. I didn't know what I was doing, she admitted. You didn't run. No, she said. I didn't. He reached for her hand again. She let him take it. Don't disappear on me, he murmured. I want tea, she said. Not unless you give me a reason. A small, tired smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. They sat there in the quiet hum of oil lamps and fresh gauze, the worst behind them for now. Out in the alley behind the diner, Elijah stood alone, watching the stars. The map was in his coat pocket, its corners stiff with old blood and new lies. He knew what came next, and it wasn't peace. If I was just a distraction, Clara whispered, what the hell else was I never meant to see? The letter arrived 3 days late, delivered not by a stagecoach, but by Tommy Briggs, the 12-year-old who swept the post office floors for pennies and free licorice. Clara was wiping down the counter when he bounded in, breathless, a smudge of ink on his cheek. Miss Whitmore, he panted, holding out the envelope like it was something alive. This came. Got stuck behind the ledger box? Postmaster says sorry. Clara wiped her hands and took it slowly, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Her stomach flipped. Matthew. The envelope was crumpled and dust-streaked, the seal cracked from heat or mishandling or time. The date in the corner read 2 weeks ago, right around when the mine shaft collapsed. Before she'd known the truth. Before Jack had nearly died. Before everything. She swallowed hard. "Thank you, Tommy," she said, and he grinned, oblivious to the weight of the letter he'd just delivered. Clara waited until the boy left, then stepped into the kitchen. She looked at the flap, her fingers trembling, not with longing. Not anymore. But with a need to understand. She tore it open and began to read. "Clara, I'm sorry this will reach you before I can explain in person. Things moved faster than I planned. My marriage to Annabelle Winslow. It was necessary. Not just for me, for the company, for everything we've worked to build in Coyote Creek. You deserve better than how I left things. But you must understand, men like me don't get to choose with their hearts. There are things in motion, Clara. Powerful things. And if you stay in that town, you'll get hurt, maybe worse. I never meant to make you a pawn, but you were a piece of something bigger." And Clara stopped reading. Her hand gripped the page tighter. Her jaw clenched. A piece. A pawn. A means to an end. There was no love in the letter. No regret. Not really. Just justification. Like she'd been some calculated detour on his way to a bigger life. She folded the paper slowly and dropped it into the stove, watching it curl black in the heat. That afternoon, the diner felt different. Not quieter. Not busier. Just sharper. The miners who came in seemed more guarded, like word of the shaft collapse had shaken more than bones. Talk of lawsuits. Missing documents. Whispers about the governor's people coming into town to evaluate investments. Clara moved through it all like a ghost. Taking orders. Pouring coffee. But her mind was elsewhere, running over every sentence in that letter, every half-truth from Matthew's mouth. So when the front door opened and Annabelle Winslow Harlan stepped inside, it didn't feel real. She wore a traveling suit of pale gray silk, cinched at the waist with silver buttons. Her hair was coiled in perfect loops, her gloves spotless despite the dust outside. And she had eyes like ice sharp, cool, calculating. Behind her were 2 men in black coats. Not deputies. Not miners. Something else. "Mrs. Harlan," Annie said dryly from behind the register. "Can I get you something?" Annabelle's gaze slid to Clara. A faint smile touched her lips. "Only a word," she said. "With her?" Annie looked at Clara. "You sure?" Clara nodded. "I can handle it." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped around the counter. Stopping a few feet from the woman who had technically stolen her future, Annabelle looked her over, top to bottom. Clara didn't flinch. "You're prettier than I expected," Annabelle said, in a wind-blown sort of way. "I'd say the same to you," Clara replied, "except I don't lie." A flicker of amusement passed over the woman's face. "So it's true. You've been slinging hash and bedding down above a diner?" Clara raised a brow. "And you came here just to confirm that?" "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice." Annabelle stepped closer. "I came to offer you an exit. Quietly now. I have a banknote with your name on it and a ticket back to Boston on tomorrow's stage. You want me gone that badly? I want distractions gone. You don't belong here, Clara. And frankly, you're a complication. I didn't inherit his married Matthew, not his baggage." Clara's voice didn't shake. "Then let's be clear. Your husband lied to me. He wrote me letters for almost a year, asked me to come, promised a life, then broke that promise," Annabelle said, unbothered. "As men do." Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "You think this is just about me being humiliated?" Annabelle shrugged. "Isn't it?" "No," Clara said. "It's about men like Matthew thinking women are tools. To soften business deals, distract regulators, or disappear when they become inconvenient." A beat of silence. Then Annabelle offered a thin smile. "You talk like a woman who thinks the world plays fair." Clara stepped even closer. "I talk like a woman who stopped playing his game. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away past Annie, past the booths, into the back room. Annabelle didn't follow, but her words hung in the air like smoke. That night, Jack found Clara sitting on the back steps, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loose. Her hands were still stained from cleaning. He sat beside her without asking. For a minute, they said nothing. Then he handed her a flask. Elijah made a special batch. Burns going down. She took a sip. Coughed. God, he chuckled. Told you. They stared out into the quiet night, the mountains' dark silhouettes against the moon. She offered me money, Clara said after a long pause. And a ticket home. Jack turned to her. You take it? The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. He nodded slowly. Why not? She looked at him, eyes tired but clear. Because going back would mean I let them win. Him, her, all of them. I'd rather build something with my own hands even, if it breaks me. Jack stared at her like he was seeing something new. Something he didn't quite know how to touch. Then slowly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. You know I care about you, he said, voice low. I know, Clara replied. But that's not enough. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. The next morning, before the sun was up, Clara opened the diner's back door and found Elijah standing there, arms crossed. Got something you need to see, he said. What is it? Something Harlan buried. I think it's time we dig it up. If you love me, Clara said, her voice shaking, then let me choose what comes next. The morning air was sharp and dry, the kind that stung the lungs just enough to remind you were alive. Clara followed Elijah through the scrub brush behind the mine, boots crunching over gravel and brittle pine needles. Neither of them spoke. He moved with quiet precision, every step deliberate. Like he already knew exactly what he was going to show her, what she was finally ready to see. They stopped near a slope cluttered with mining refuse old wood beams. Rusted tools, scraps of fabric stained by time and weather. Elijah knelt and pulled aside a tarp, half buried under debris. Beneath it was a metal lockbox, the kind used for payroll or records. He didn't hand it to her. He opened it. Inside were stacks of papers, some crisp, some weather-worn, deed transfers, ledger books. A few envelopes marked with the Silver Basin Company seal. At the top of the pile, a folder titled West Line Expansion Black Beer Territory. Clara's stomach turned. This is yours, she said. Elijah didn't respond. She reached in and pulled out the top few pages. They were copies of land ownership documents. Old ones. But the signatures. They weren't right. Misspelled names. Ink that bled inconsistently. The notary seal wasn't even from Coyote Creek. These are forged, she whispered. Yeah, Elijah said. And not well. Why hide them here? He stood, brushing dust from his hands. Because the further from the town ledgers they are, the harder it is for anyone to connect the dots. These weren't meant to be found. Clara flipped through a few more. One was dated 2 weeks before Matthew sent her the first letter. She stopped cold. I was a decoy, she muttered. While he did this, Elijah's eyes didn't soften. That's not your shame to carry. No, she said. But I carried it anyway. That night, Clara sat across from Annie at the diner's back table, the lockbox between them. Jack stood behind her, arms crossed. He looked tired, hollow. Annie scanned the documents, her expression darkening by the second. Sweet hell, she muttered. This is bad. This is a felony, Clara said. And if the governor's daughter is sitting pretty on land bought through fraud, it's a scandal. Jack didn't speak. Annie glanced at him. You knew? He nodded once. I didn't know how deep it went, but I knew Matthew wasn't clean. I didn't want to believe he'd touch Elijah's land. You were his partner, Clara said, quieter now. You shared a business with him. I know. The silence sat thick between them. I'm sorry, Jack said, voice tight. I should have looked harder. Asked more questions. Clara nodded slowly. You should have, but she didn't say anything else. Not yet. Later that week, Clara approached Annie with a proposal. I want to buy in. Annie blinked. Buy in? To the diner. I want to make it more. Expand the upstairs into a boarding house. Travelers, women workers, teachers, anyone looking for a place with a locked door and a clean bed. You serious? As a broken promise, Annie stared at her a long moment. That's going to take real work. Not just ladling soup and wiping tables. I know. And you got nothing to your name but scorched love letters and pride. Clara didn't flinch. Then I'll pay in sweat. Annie gave a half smile. That's more than most. By the following week, lumber was stacked outside the back door. Elijah helped reinforce the staircase. Clara rewrote the business ledger to reflect shared ownership, 45% Callahan, 45% Whitmore, 10% held in reserve for future expansion. Jack came by on the third day, watched her hammer a board into place, and cleared his throat. Need help? Clara looked over her shoulder. You're good at fixing things after they break. He winced a little, but didn't back away. Sometimes, she stood. Then earn it. He did. Every day after that, one night, long after the hammers had gone quiet and the lanterns cast warm light on the freshly painted hallway upstairs, Jack found her sitting alone on the top step, legs dangling. You're building something real, he said, almost reverent. Clara nodded. Something no one can take. He sat beside her. And me. She turned to look at him, unsure how to say it without hurting either of them. I'm not mad you didn't know, she said. I'm mad you didn't ask. You let Matthew's shadow define too much of what you didn't want to see. He nodded. I did. And now, I see you. They sat in silence for a while. I want you in my life, he said finally, but not as someone to rescue. As someone to stand beside. Clara looked at him, heart caught somewhere between caution and wanting. Then prove it, she said softly. That night, lightning flickered on the ridge beyond town. The wind shifted, the kind that carried warnings. The next day, word came. A group of federal agents had arrived in Denver. Looking into land disputes, rumors were circling. Names were leaking. Clara read the telegram twice. Everything was coming undone. The storm rolled in from the Rockies that night, but the real damage was already done. The rain came without warning. One minute, the sky was a moody gray. The next, it split open with a violence that sent shopkeepers rushing to shutter windows and pull awnings taut. Thunder cracked hard and close, rolling through Coyote Creek like a cannon. The wind screamed down the main street, lifting dust and loose shingles and slapping wooden signs against their posts. Clara stood in the doorway of the diner, apron still on, watching the sky fall. Monsoon's early, Annie muttered behind her, arms crossed, voice grim. This town's held together by bent nails and wishful thinking. Hope the roof holds. Clara turned. The new lumber's still exposed upstairs. Annie nodded. I'll grab the tarps. As she disappeared into the back, Clara stepped onto the porch. She knew the feeling in the air, not just storm, but reckoning. The kind that made people run for shelter and say prayers they hadn't spoken in years. She wasn't afraid of storms. She'd already lived through worse. By the time the first wave of lightning split the sky clean in two, Jack had made it to the diner soaked to the bone. His boots squelched as he crossed the porch. I tried to get the west window shuttered, he said, wiping water from his face. It's coming in sideways. Clara grabbed a towel from the counter and tossed it at him. You need to stop trying to fix everything that breaks, she said, half smiling. He took it. Old habit. Behind them, Elijah appeared from the kitchen stairs, shirt damp, a nail still stuck between his teeth. I got the tarps secured over the beams, but if the wind shifts, we'll have to bucket the leak, he said. Clara nodded. Thank you. They all stood still for a second, as thunder boomed again, rattling the glass. Then the door slammed open. Sheriff Amos Bell stumbled inside, rain clinging to his coat like an extra layer of skin. His face was pale. Not from the storm, but from the paper he held in his hand. Clara, he said, eyes finding her immediately. It's about Matthew. They sat at the back table, wind howling outside, while the storm pounded the town. Jack stood behind Clara's chair. Elijah leaned in the doorway. Annie poured whiskey into mismatched glasses and set them down with enough force to clink. Sheriff Bell laid out the telegram. Clara read the first line and felt her stomach knot. Matthew Harlan was dead. Shot twice outside a boarding house in Denver. His death was being ruled suspicious foul, play suspected. No known assailant. Dead men don't confess, Annie muttered. Bell nodded. But they leave trails. And this one's ugly. Federal agents recovered files from his Denver office. Land deals. Bribes. Payments to surveyors and false witnesses. It's bad. Clara's voice was low. Does it tie back to here? Not yet. But the governor's people are on edge. Especially his daughter. She. Suz. Quiet, but not clean. Elijah stepped forward. What happens to the land claims now? Bell sighed. If we can prove fraud, some deeds could be reversed. But without Harlan alive to testify, it'll be slower. Harder. Clara leaned back, eyes unfocused. He didn't just run from responsibility. He ran from us. From every life he touched. Jack reached for her hand, but she didn't take it this time. Not yet. Later, as the rain eased into a steady pour and the thunder faded into background noise, Clara sat alone upstairs, looking out over the muddy street. The new roof held, just barely. A thin trickle of water slid down the wall, but it didn't matter. The town was still standing, and so was she. Jack knocked softly and stepped in. They're saying the man who killed him might have been a banker, he said. Someone Matthew owed. Clara nodded. He made enemies everywhere he went. Jack stepped closer. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. He hesitated. What does this mean for you? She turned to him. It means I'm free. Jack studied her for a long moment. And us? She didn't answer right away. Her heart was still full of ash and questions. I've spent so long trying to prove I was more than what Matthew saw in me, she said finally. Now he's gone, and I still don't know if I am. You are, Jack said, voice steady. Clara looked down. But I need to believe it, not just hear it. I have to build something that's mine. Fully mine. I need that before I can offer anything real. Jack nodded. Then I'll wait. She looked up. What if I never ask you to stay? He smiled, soft and sure. Then I'll still be glad I met you. Downstairs, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The sky opened to a pale sliver of moonlight. Clara walked to the front porch and stepped into the cool, wet air. The earth smelled clean again. Washed. Like something had been lifted. The sign above the diner creaked. She looked up at it. It still said Callahan's. But soon, it would read something new. She didn't know what yet. But she'd name it herself. He's gone, but I'm still Harand. I don't need his name to matter. The first guest arrived just after sunrise. She was young, maybe 20, with a travel bag worn thin at the seams, and eyes that scanned the town like she was memorizing it before it had a chance to forget her. Clara saw her from the upstairs window, already dressed, hair tied back, ledger in hand. The girl hesitated at the front steps, staring up at the freshly painted sign that now hung proudly above the diner door. The way station. Not Whitmore's, not Callahan's. Just the way station. A place to stop. To rest. To begin again. Clara opened the door and stepped outside, apron tied, smile warm but steady. You looking for a room? She asked. The girl nodded. If it's not too much trouble? Only trouble around here's the biscuits being too good. Come in. The boarding house filled slowly, and only with people who needed it. A school teacher passing through on her way to Montana. A widow with a boy too clever for his own good. Two sisters fleeing a rushed marriage deal down in Fort Bridger. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody needed to. Annie kept the diner running like always, but she stopped calling Clara City Girl and started calling her partner. Elijah brought lumber when they needed more walls, books when they needed quiet, a quiet presence whenever the noise got too loud. He never lingered too long, but Clara always knew he was near. And Jack stayed. Not in her bed. Not as a promise. Just near. Consistent. Steady. She didn't ask for more. He didn't T-push. Some nights they sat on the porch and didn't speak at all. Other nights they laughed like old friends. There was something sacred about not needing to name what was growing. Something honest about letting it become whatever it would be. One morning, weeks later, Clara opened the bottom drawer of her writing desk and pulled out the last envelope she hadn't burned. It wasn't from Matthew. It was from herself. A letter she'd written in her darkest hour when she first arrived. Broken and furious, days after realizing he'd never come for her. A letter she'd never sent. She read it again now. Not with sadness. With gratitude. Because that woman, the one who wrote through gritted teeth, full of pain and confusion and fire, had survived. She had planted the seed of something better, even in anger. Clara didn't cry. She just smiled, folded it back up, and placed it under the counter in the kitchen, where no one else would find it. A reminder, the past doesn't have to define you, but it does shape the way you stand. The first snow came early. Clara stepped out onto the porch, mug of coffee in hand, and watched the flakes tumble onto the roofs of Coyote Creek like someone shaking powdered sugar over a memory. The town was quieter in winter, but stronger. The kind of place that had earned its scars. Behind her, she heard footsteps, soft, bare, hesitant. One of the boarders, a young boy, peeked out, blanket around his shoulders. He looked at her with sleepy eyes. "Is it always this quiet when it snows?" "Sometimes," Clara said. "But quiet doesn't mean empty." He nodded, thoughtful. "I like it here." "I'm glad," she said. "That means it's working." "What's working?" "This place." The boy smiled. "It feels safe." She ruffled his hair gently. "That's the idea." That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the fire was low, Clara sat at the kitchen table, ink-stained fingers curled around a pen. She wasn't writing a letter. She was writing a ledger entry, and then a menu, and then just for herself a story. Not about a girl who was left behind, but about a woman who stayed. She never did return to Boston, not because she couldn't, because she didn't want to. Clara built a life out of scraps and hurt and grit, and joy torrentially. The slow kind, the quiet kind. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're washing dishes or laughing over burned cornbread. Coyote Creek didn't change overnight, but it changed enough, and so did she. She wasn't the bride he married, or the woman they expected. She was something else entirely, something of her own making. And that, in the end, was the whole damn point.